Imagine a society where the most important decisions, who leads, what laws are made, and even matters of war and peace, are placed in the hands of the masses. Not just the educated, the wise, or the experienced, but everyone. The rich and the poor, the informed and the ignorant, the rational and the impulsive, all given an equal say. Sounds fair, right? It's the system we call democracy. The system that governs much of the world today. But what if I told you that one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Socrates, didn't just doubt democracy, he hated it. Not because he was against freedom or fairness, but because he believed democracy, in its purest form, was nothing more than a pathway to ignorance, corruption, and ultimately tyranny. And history seems to prove him right. Think about the world today. Politicians winning elections through empty promises, crowds being manipulated by emotions rather than logic, people voting not based on knowledge, but on catchy slogans. Socrates saw these dangers thousands of years ago, and for daring to question the flaws of democracy, he paid the ultimate price, his life. So, what exactly did Socrates say about democracy that made it so dangerous? And could he have been right all along? Let's find out. Why Socrates feared democracy. To understand why Socrates despised democracy, we have to look at how he viewed knowledge and leadership. Socrates believed that wisdom was not something everyone possessed, and because of this, not everyone should have an equal say in important decisions. He compared democracy to a ship at sea. Imagine you're on a ship and a storm is approaching. Would you rather have a trained, experienced captain steering the vessel, or would you take a vote among all the passengers, regardless of whether they've ever sailed before? The answer is obvious. You'd want the expert in charge. Yet, in a democracy, Socrates argued, we do the exact opposite. Instead of entrusting leadership to those who are most knowledgeable, we give every person, wise or foolish, an equal vote. And what happens? The loudest, most persuasive, and most deceptive voices win. Not the wisest, not the most capable, just those who can manipulate the crowd. This, Socrates believed, was a recipe for disaster. In his eyes, democracy was nothing more than mob rule in disguise, where the masses, driven by emotions rather than reason, could be easily swayed by charismatic leaders who promised them what they wanted to hear, rather than what was best for society. And this wasn't just a theory. Socrates witnessed it firsthand in Athens. The democratic system had turned into a popularity contest where leaders made reckless decisions that led to war, economic failure, and ultimately, the downfall of the city itself. Socrates feared that democracy would not lead to freedom, but instead to a new kind of tyranny, one where ignorance ruled over wisdom. And in the end, democracy proved him right, because it was democracy itself that sentenced him to death. The trial and death of Socrates, democracy's ultimate betrayal. Socrates' worst fears about democracy became his own tragic reality. Despite dedicating his life to seeking truth, questioning authority, and challenging ignorance, it was democracy itself that ultimately sentenced him to death. In 399 BCE, Socrates was put on trial by the Athenian government, a government chosen by the people. He was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods of Athens, but in reality, his real crime was something far more dangerous. He made people think. He exposed the incompetence of Athenian leaders and the flaws of democracy, and for that, he became a threat. During the trial, Socrates had a chance to beg for mercy, to apologize, to persuade the jury to spare his life. But that wasn't his way. Instead, he stood firm in his beliefs, defending his right to question and challenge authority. In a courtroom filled with 500 citizens, he spoke the truth without fear, knowing full well it would cost him everything. When the votes were cast, the result was shocking but unsurprising. 280 citizens voted for his execution, while only 220 voted to acquit him. A slim majority, yet enough to seal his fate. Socrates was sentenced to death by hemlock poisoning, a slow and painful end for the greatest philosopher of his time. But here's the most ironic part: he could have escaped. His followers offered to bribe the guards and arrange for his freedom, but Socrates refused. He chose to die rather than betray his principles. In his final moments, surrounded by his students, he drank the poison with calm acceptance, proving that his philosophy was not just words, but a way of life. Socrates' death was the ultimate example of how democracy, when left unchecked, can destroy the very voices that challenge it. He feared that democracy would turn into tyranny, and in his case, it did. The majority silenced the minority, replacing truth with comfort and wisdom with ignorance. But here's the question: was Socrates right? Is democracy truly a failed system, or was Athens simply not ready for it? And more importantly, what does this mean for us today? Was Socrates right? The dangers of an uneducated majority. Socrates' execution wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a warning. He believed that a government led by the uninformed and emotionally driven masses would eventually collapse under its own weight. And history has shown us that time and time again, when power is placed in the hands of those who lack wisdom, corruption, chaos, and tyranny follow. Think about it. How often do we see leaders elected based on popularity rather than competence? How often do people vote not because they understand policies, but because they are influenced by emotions, propaganda, or empty promises? Socrates feared that democracy could be easily manipulated, that clever speakers, demagogues, and populists could exploit the ignorance of the masses, leading people to choose leaders who do not act in their best interest. He argued that just as a skilled doctor should be trusted to heal the sick, a nation should be led by those who truly understand governance, not by those who simply tell people what they want to hear. And if we look around today, we can see why Socrates' warnings still matter. In the modern world, social media spreads misinformation at an unprecedented speed. Politicians win elections by stirring emotions rather than offering solutions. People make decisions not based on facts but on fear, outrage, and groupthink. The question is, has democracy evolved into the very system Socrates feared? Have we allowed ourselves to be ruled by leaders chosen not for their wisdom, but for their ability to manipulate? And if so, what can we do about it? Socrates never provided a perfect solution, but his life and death serve as a powerful lesson. Democracy without wisdom is dangerous. A free society cannot function properly if its people do not question, do not think critically, and do not seek knowledge. So the real challenge is this: how do we prevent democracy from becoming the tyranny of the ignorant? That is a question only you can answer. Socrates' legacy, a warning and a challenge. Socrates' trial and execution were more than just a historical event. They were a turning point in human thought, a stark reminder of what happens when wisdom is silenced by fear, when truth is sacrificed for comfort, and when democracy fails to uphold its own ideals. He may have been condemned by Athens, but his ideas refused to die. Instead, they became immortal, inspiring philosophers, revolutionaries, and free thinkers across generations. His story is not just a lesson from the past, it is a warning for the present and the future. So what can we learn from Socrates today? 1. Democracy without education is a danger to itself. Socrates believed that an uninformed and easily manipulated populace could be the downfall of democracy. If citizens do not develop critical thinking skills, if they fail to question authority, and if they are swayed by rhetoric rather than reason, then democracy can quickly turn into tyranny. A society that values popularity over wisdom, that elevates demagogues over thinkers, is doomed to repeat the mistakes of ancient Athens. We must ask ourselves, are we truly informed participants in our political systems, or are we blindly following the loudest voices? 2. The unpopularity of truth. Socrates wasn't executed because he was wrong. He was executed because he was inconvenient. He held up a mirror to society, exposing its contradictions, flaws, and hypocrisies. But instead of self-reflection, the people of Athens chose denial. This is not just a relic of the past. Even today, uncomfortable truths are often met with resistance. Whistleblowers, reformers, and truth-seekers face ridicule, censorship, and even punishment. Socrates' fate challenges us to ask, are we willing to embrace difficult truths, or do we silence those who question our reality? 3. Philosophy is not just about thinking, it's about living. Socrates didn't just theorize about wisdom, justice, and virtue. He lived by them. Even in the face of death, he refused to betray his principles. His choice to drink the hemlock rather than flee was an ultimate act of integrity. In our modern world, where convenience often trumps conviction, Socrates' life serves as a reminder that standing by your values comes at a cost. But the real question is, how many of us are willing to pay that price? The unfinished debate, will we learn or will we repeat? History has shown that societies tend to repeat their mistakes when they fail to learn from them. Will we allow ignorance and manipulation to dictate our future? Will we continue choosing comfort over truth? Or will we rise to the challenge that Socrates set for us, to think deeply, question authority, and seek wisdom over blind conformity? The choice is ours. The death of Socrates, a lesson for every generation. Socrates' execution was not just the silencing of one man, it was the silencing of critical thought, the triumph of fear over wisdom. But history has shown that ideas, once spoken, cannot be killed. His death became a symbol of resistance against ignorance, a warning about the fragility of truth in a world where power often dictates reality. The Athenians may have condemned Socrates, but in doing so, they immortalized his philosophy. His trial was meant to erase him, but instead, it ensured his legacy would live on for centuries. From Plato to Nietzsche, from political thinkers to modern-day intellectuals, the Socratic method of questioning authority, seeking truth, and challenging popular opinion remains a cornerstone of philosophy and rational thought. But here's the problem. Socrates' story is not just ancient history. It happens in different forms even today. Every era has its truth seekers who are labeled troublemakers. Every society has those who challenge the status quo, only to be ridiculed, cast out, or worse. Whether it's journalists exposing corruption, scientists warning about inconvenient realities, or individuals who refuse to conform to societal expectations, the world still resists those who think differently. So the real question is, are we any different from the Athenians who sentenced Socrates to death? Do we, too, reject wisdom when it threatens our comfort? Do we dismiss those who challenge our deeply held beliefs? Are we willing to embrace critical thinking, or do we cling to the illusion of certainty? Socrates' death is not just a historical event. It is a test, a question, a challenge that each generation must face. What will our answer be? Socrates' trial and execution were more than just a historical event. They were a symbol of the struggle between truth and ignorance, wisdom and manipulation, philosophy and politics. He may have been condemned by Athens, but his ideas refused to die. Instead, they became more powerful, challenging every generation to think critically about the society they live in. So what can we learn from Socrates today? First, democracy without education is dangerous. If people are not equipped with knowledge, if they do not think critically, they become easy targets for manipulation. A free society can only function when its citizens are informed, rational, and willing to challenge what they are told. Second, truth is often unpopular. Socrates was executed not because he was wrong, but because he made people uncomfortable. He forced them to question their beliefs, their leaders, and even themselves. But instead of embracing self-reflection, the people of Athens chose silence over wisdom, comfort over truth. And finally, philosophy is not just about thinking, it's about living. Socrates didn't just talk about truth, wisdom, and justice. He lived by those principles, even when it cost him his life. His story is a reminder that seeking knowledge is not always easy, and standing by your beliefs can come at a price. But the question is, will we learn from history, or are we doomed to repeat it? Will we embrace the challenge of thinking critically, questioning authority, and seeking wisdom, or will we allow ignorance to rule over us? The choice is yours. Now, let's take this conversation further. Socrates was silenced, but his ideas continue to echo through time. His story isn't just history. It's a warning, a challenge, and a call to think for ourselves. In a world full of distractions, misinformation, and shallow opinions, will you be one of the few who seek wisdom? If you believe in questioning the world around you, in challenging assumptions, and in thinking deeper, then join this journey. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video that forces you to see the world differently. And if this video made you think, drop a comment below. What do you think Socrates would say about today's society? Would he still hate democracy, or would he see hope in it? Let's keep this conversation alive, because real change starts with the courage to think differently.